Hey all, it's Matt, your average gamer. Today we've got 10 more fun builds for you to try out in Elden Ring. There's even a few things I learned while making this video, as Elden Ring is such a big game that I'm still learning more about weapons I've rarely used. Before we continue and jump into this fun-packed build video, be sure to check out the description for links to support the channel. There's even 20% off of G Fuel with the code YourAverageGamer, as well as 3 extra months free on a yearly subscription for ExpressVPN, a great way to keep your browsing safer and more private. For the first build here, we have Wild Strikes on the Nightrider Flail. The Nightrider Flail is a surprisingly good weapon, and Wild Strikes on this hits really hard too. Add in Blood Flame Blade for a total of 90 bleed, and you'll be taking down bosses fairly easily. This is one I've rarely used, but found out how good Wild Strikes can be on this awesome flail. White Mask aside, this goes well with the Nightrider set if you're going for a full Nightrider build. This is a really powerful one for those looking for a flail build. I know there's a lot of you that did request a flail build, so I did this on the Nightrider flail. I did spinning weapon, I think, recently on the regular flail as well. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Keen Nightrider flail, plus 25 preferably. Any seal will do. We have a mix of the Knights Cavalry, Veterans Gauntlets, and the Skeletal Mask on. We have the Shard of Alexander, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Thorny Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats for this one. So since you get an A in Keen Affinity, this is a Dexterity build where we've hit 75 Dexterity. We have 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance, and then don't worry about the Arcane, that's from the starting class. We were using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and then Blood Flame Blade for a well-rounded Nightrider Flail build. Second build uses the Staff of the Avatar Faith version, so there's 2 of these and both get the butt slam. One can proc rot on regular hits and the other has faith scaling and higher overall AR. Erdtree slam itself is just okay, but in all fairness it's fun to beat bosses this way. The slam down is kind of hilarious and the build itself is as goofy as it looks. Give this one a try for the memes and a general good time. After this fight, by the way, we'll be seeing the Sacrificial Axe drop, which will appear in this video on another build. We ended up doing a build for the Sacrificial Axe. This is where you get it in the Weeping Peninsula, and it ended up being a really cool weapon to use as a faith build. We're going to show that off later in the video. In a second here, we're going to be going over build, stats, and everything you need to know for the Erdtree Slam build. And there is the axe that drops. We're going to talk about that later, as I mentioned, because it turns out that axe is very good when it comes to faith scaling for sacred and flame art affinities. Let's get into equipment for this one. For equipment, we have the Staff of the Avatar, preferably plus 10. Any seal will do. I had a mix of random armor on. You can check it out if you want. We did hit 51 poise. Shard of Alexander, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Ritual Swords Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats for this one. This is very much a strength and faith build, so we're pretty evenly split. We have 50 strength and 40 faith. We hit 60 vigor, 21 mind. And we're using Golden Vow along with Halashaburi as our buffs and getting a decent amount of damage for a well-rounded build of the Staff of the Avatar. The third build here is the Hookclaws. Despite them being more damaging on Keen Affinity than the Raptor's Talons, I usually prefer the Raptor's Talons due to the unique R2 that has that really cool flip. That being said, the Hookclaws shred on Keen Affinity with Blood Flame Blade. These are very powerful, as claws have been super powerful since the huge buff they received a few patches ago, and they do a ton of damage and bleed buildup. And by the way, if you're not subscribed, definitely be sure to sub. Now's the time to subscribe. We're going to be continuing coverage for Elden Ring and keeping the game fun. I know the DLC wait's going to be even longer now. I covered that in my last video. Unfortunately, it did not pop up at the Game Awards, but there is still hope for a trailer in January, and hopefully that happens. Let's get new equipment here. For equipment, we have the Hookclaws, plus 25 preferably. Any seal will do. We were using the White Mask. We did hit 51 poise. Shard of Alexander, Rottenwing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Lord of Blood's Exaltation. And then we have the Thorny Tier, Faith Tier. Let's get into stats for this build. And for the stats on this one, we're once again running a Dexterity build. You can actually do this on the same stats as that initial setup for the Nightrider Flail, and then here we're using Golden Vow, Flame Grant Me Strength, and Blood Flame Blade. And we have 60 Vigor again, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance. This ended up being a really well-rounded build, and the Hookclaws are great in Keen Affinity. They do a ton of damage and a ton of bleed build-up. It's certainly a powerful build. So a funny clip here, I'm going to show off the next build in a second, but I just want to show sometimes I have some funny things happen throughout my journeys, and I was just buffing for the next boss in the next build, and apparently that guy with the shield and the one that can parry literally everything that you do just decided to jump in the hole where the elevator was. I thought that was funny. But next up here we have the curved sword builds. We did a little something different for this one. Yeah, that guy can be a pain to fight, but I actually beat him to the elevator that time. Anyways, the next one up here, we have a mix of curved swords using the scimitar and the shotel, if that's how you say it, with seppuku on them. This is a mixed curved sword build that uses bleed and seppuku for a lot of damage. And you're going to see a lot of damage here. This is your typical jump attack bleed build, except we're using 2 random curved swords because I wanted to see how good they are. They both scale well with dexterity on top of a little bit of arcane when you're putting them in blood affinity, and as you can see they do a ton of bleed buildup and successive attack damage. Which you're going to see in the spotlight here in a second, as Renala absolutely gets destroyed by this. You can easily beat her with most builds, but yeah, the bleed build there just absolutely chewed through her HP, and she pretty much disappeared on New Game Plus 7, but even on New Game Plus 7, she doesn't have a ton of HP. The only time she's even somewhat difficult for me is if I'm on a mage build because she has 80% magic resistance. Aside from that, she is fairly easily. And I know this is a little bit backwards, but we're going to show the dog fight with this build, and then we're going to go over equipment and everything. So this dog can be a pain sometimes, but he has minimal HP. Even on max scaling, he doesn't have a lot. I think it's like 5,000 or something. It's not even a lot at all. But as far as his attack patterns go, he can be a little bit frustrating, but we're able to take him down using a mix of 2 curved swords on a dexterity and arcane build. By the way, we're going to be doing another dex arcane build later in the video that I'm going to show off too. You can do with the same stats. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the scimitar and shottle, or shoto, however you say that, and we both have them in blood affinity, seppuku, and we got the white mask, raptor's black feathers, claw talisman, rotten wing sword insignia, Listen's prosthesis, Lord of Blood's exaltation, thorny tier, fate tier. Let's get into stats for this build. For stats, since this is a dexterity and arcane build primarily, we hit the soft caps on both. We have 45 dexterity and the soft cap for arcane at 45, and we have 60 vigor. And we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength as our buffs, which we can do both with the Faith tier. By the way, if you're wondering how I sound, I am currently recovering, apparently, from the stomach flu, which I got. And yeah, it was a not so great couple of days. Kind of getting my energy back, but it's not quite there yet. The next build we have here is the Frozen Needle build, something I don't think I've ever covered on my channel. Now, you can get a small ranged attack from the charged R2 on this weapon that can build up frost. It can't be boosted by the Axe Talisman. I did test it with the Axe Talisman and that does not boost it, but it does give you a little bit of extra frost buildup and a nice little mid-range attack that you can use with the charged R2. In the offhand, we have the Spear, Rapier, and Keen Affinity with Flaming Strike. The Flaming Strike part of it is so that we have a Fire and Frost build. You're actually going to see this more so on display in the second phase, where I think we're able to get 2 procs very quickly. This is definitely a good combination build. The only downside for the Frozen Needle that I need to make a mention of is it has notoriously low AR, but having the Frost build up, having a B in Dexterity gives you decent damage while also having that option to get in some Frost damage too, and then use the Fire to put it out and then reproc the Frost. And you're going to see exactly that in Phase 2 here, as we're able to get in 2 procs of the Frost. We actually got 1 before he Phase 2, so I think it was 3 in total, and then use the Fire to put it out for a decent damage build, using both Fire and Frost and the Frozen Needle. Now, you can technically proc Rot in the offhand, but the issue there is the L1s that you get for the Rapier moveset will actually have 3 successive hits from your right hand, so it's more likely to proc the Frost. Let's get into equipment. For equipment, we have the Frozen Needle plus 10, the Spear Rapier plus 25, and Keen Affinity with Flaming Strike. We have a random set of armor on, Shard of Alexander, Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, Ritual Swords Talisman, Thorny Tier, Fate tier. Let's get into stats for this build. And for stats here, we're once again a dexterity focused build. By the way, I will put in the description below the builds that you can use together. For this, we use Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength again. We have 60 vigor, 75 dexterity, 20 mind, 26 endurance for a well-rounded Frost and Fire build with the Frozen Needle. Build number 6 is Stormblade on the Flamberge, if that's how you say it, which is a solid combination. While you can't get range bleed, I added in Blood Flame Blade for any normal hits, which would give you 95 bleed per hit. Stormblade is awesome and it's extremely fast. I rarely use it because it's not quite OP by the time you're on max scaling, but it does enough damage and it's extremely spammable. Against a Gil here it does plenty enough, and as usual, hitting them in the head does additional damage. Yeah, you do get additional damage for hitting dragons in the head, so that's a big plus there, but overall we came up with a powerful Stormblade build that uses the Flamberge as well, and we're going to go over equipment now. For equipment, we have the Keen Flamberge, which by the way gets an A in Keen Affinity with Stormblade on it. Any seal will do. We had part of the Veteran set on, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Ritual Shield Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Defense tier, Faith tier. Let's get into stats for this one. For stats here, we have 70 Dexterity, 25 Faith, 60 Vigor, 20 Mind, 26 Endurance. Same stats, by the way, same basic setup as the Nightrider Flail and the Hookclaws for another powerful Dexterity build where we use Blood Flame Blade combination with Stormblade on the Flamberge. The next build we have up here is a bleed build for the Dismounters. This is going to be a bleed setup for the Dismounters, which are essentially heavier weapons, and you're not going to get the 4 hits on each attack, but we can get in a lot of damage from our jump attacks and some decent bleed build up too. And of course, we're going to be taking on Radahn on New Game +7, and he can be intimidating at times because, I mean, obviously he's a difficult boss for some, but once you get used to his moveset, a lot of the movesets that he has are very easily avoidable. I occasionally do get hit. A lot of times his delayed attacks will hit me more so, but his combos most of the time, you can dodge right through. Which is a big bonus when you're trying to go back in and get in more jump attack damage. Overall, though, we're able to get a couple of bleed procs. We're going to be going into phase 2, and he's not going to have a lot of HP by the time we get to it. And he's going to come back down. Make sure you avoid the combat at all costs, because obviously this could one-hit you at pretty much any amount of vigor. I'm not even sure you can tank that entirely. I never really found that out. But anyways, after we avoid that, we're going to go back in with the Dismounters, and we're going to continue to try to get in jump attacks and see how hard we can hit him with a heavier bleed type weapon. And of course, all bosses at the end like to give you a little bit of a hard time, but don't mind me, I'm not the best with the jump attacks. As you can see, I miss sometimes, but yeah, we end up taking Radahn down, not too bad. He only killed me once. I believe I got him on the second try. The only other boss I think I faced in this video that took 2 tries was the dog. Aside from that, it's pretty much smooth sailing. Let's go into equipment for this one. For equipment, we have 2 Dismounters in Blood Affinity with Seppuku on him, which kind of makes him a quality weapon, but I lean towards Strength. We have a random set of armor on with the White Mask. Raptor's Black Feathers would be good for this. Lord of Blood's Exaltation, Ritual Swords Talisman, Claw Talisman, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Stamina tier, Faith tier. Let's get into stats. And for stats, when you're in Blood Affinity, it kind of turns this into a quality weapon, but I lean towards Strength, so I went for 40 Strength, 16 Dexterity, which is the minimum you need, 45 Arcane, and then we have 60 Vigor. You don't need a lot of Mind on a bleed build. No joke intended, but you really don't. It's only 17 there, 27 Endurance for a well-rounded build. For the 8th build on this list, we have Regalia of Eochaid, if that's how you say it. I have no idea how to say it. Anyways, this is basically discount Mariah's Executioner Sword. It's not as good as its better half, but the fact that it's Dexterity and Arcane gives you another option when you're running the Bandit Curve Swords or Twin Blades. It can still stack good damage and makes for a well-rounded build. One thing I learned was that you can get this weapon early by going past the 3rd Church of Marika and making some jumps near the water to grab this without having to go through the cave on Caelid's side. I was able to grab it early that way, and ultimately it's a really solid and enjoyable Dexterity and Arcane weapon. This is definitely one that I recommend giving a try if you're looking to have a fun playthrough. Again, you can get this very early if you do the jumping way of grabbing it, or you can even go through Caelid. It's not too far. Grab this and then get like the mini Marius Executioner Sword. And it's pretty powerful too. It's not as powerful as Marius Executioner Sword, but at the same time it's Dexterity and Arcane, so it's not going to be as powerful as a strength weapon, and it's a lot lighter weight too. So we have that weapon at +10, I believe. Preferably any seal will do. Random set of armor on, Shard of Alexander. We have Rotten Wing Sword Insignia, Millicent's Prosthesis, the Godfrey icon because it is chargeable, Thorny tier, Fate tier for buffs. Let's talk about stats. And for buffs, by the way, we're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength. And then for this, we have 45 Dexterity and 45 Arcane. This is going to be the same basic setup that you would have on a Dex Arcane Bleed type build, with the soft cap on Arcane at 45, and then 45 Dexterity for a well-rounded build. This one at number 9 is rather interesting, as I've done a build for the Halo Scythe that briefly mentioned the Cleanrot Spear but didn't focus much on it. This one isn't extremely powerful, but the Ash can be very useful. The main issue is it's a very quality weapon, getting a C in Strength and Dexterity and a D in Faith, but the Ash scales mainly with your Faith stat on the holy damage part, while the swing is AR. Again, not the most powerful build on here, but still a fun weapon to use. If you combo this with the Halo Scythe, it becomes much better, as you can use the Cleanrot Spear up close and the Halo Scythe for ranged attacks. And the Ash, by the way, is 2 parts, but it's on 1 input. That first hit, as I mentioned, is going to be AR, so that's going to factor in Strength, Dexterity, and Faith, and then the Faith portion is the spears that come out of the ground. Overall, not a bad weapon, just not super OP. It takes a little bit of skill to use, and then of course it's a spear, so if you want to use it with the shield or something like that, it definitely works with that too. Let's get into equipment. We have the Cleanrot Spear plus 10 preferably. Any seal will do. Cleanrot set on. We have the Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Sacred Scorpion Charm, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Holy Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about the stats for this build. Since this is a very quality weapon and I'm two-handing it, I'm essentially going to be getting that 1.5 times strength bonus, so 45 strength, we're at 40 dexterity and 35 faith, 45 with the faith tier I believe in total. We have 23 mind, 60 vigor. And by the way, for buffs, we're using Golden Vow, Blessings of the Erdtree for a little extra HP, and then we have Hellish Brewery, which will boost the entire weapon art by 25%, giving us a well-rounded and not too powerful, but decent build for the Cleanrot Spear. And the last build for today is one I learned the most on, the Sacrificial Axe. The Sacrificial Axe has really solid AR in Flame Art and Sacred Affinity. It's actually pretty amazing if you're looking for a powerful, but not too easy build. Axes in general, much like spears which we just talked about, aren't the best class, but interestingly with Flame Art and Flaming Strike activated, the Sacrificial Axe itself will get around 800 AR. That's a crazy amount for a weapon that is only slightly heavier than a curved sword or a short sword. This weapon certainly hits hard and is solid for faith builds for another reason too. It regens FP when you defeat enemies. This will stack with other FP regen, and I'll show in the next clip how much you can get per regular enemy taken down. In Flame Art, you could run a Fire and Faith build that can melt mobs and have this as your melee weapon, consistently getting the FP back you were missing and stacking it with whatever else you choose. The Sacrificial Axe impressed me for a regular axe, and I'm certainly going to try it in Sacred Affinity in the near future as well, even if I do get beat up by this dragon a little bit more than I probably should have. Yeah, I mean, it's not as bad as, the final boss. There's not a lot of spoilers in this video, so I'm not going to talk too much about that one, but I think we all know, at least for the ones of us that have gotten there, how we feel about that. As far as the dragons go, though, sometimes you get some RNG where they stay close, other times they just tend to fly off and go off on their own, which can make the fight go on for a little bit longer than you would want. Which is precisely what's happening here. As I'm voicing this over, we end up finally taking the dragon down, but yeah, that went on for a little longer than I would have liked because he flew away a couple times and I ended up having to chase him down. In a second here, we're going to go over equipment. For equipment, we have the Sacrificial Axe, preferably plus 25 in Flame Art with Flaming Strike on it. The Erdtree Seal would work well here. Random set of armor on, Shard of Alexander, Ritual Swords Talisman, Fire Scorpion Charm, Dragoncrest Great Shield Talisman, Fire Tier, Faith Tier. Let's talk about stats. And for stats for this one, we're heavily invested in Faith. We've got Faith all the way up to 75. We have 60 Vigor, 23 Mind, 27 Endurance. We're using Golden Vow and Flame Grant Me Strength for our buffs. Keep in mind, the only time Flame Grant Me Strength beats Hellish Brewery is if you're doing both fire and physical damage. In this case, we are. So you may not have caught it at the end of the boss fight there, so I want to show this real quick, but this is basically the concept of the regen you get from it. You're going to see here, you get a little FP regen. It actually shows you on screen with the blue mana that you see there, and we end up regenning a little bit of FP back when you defeat an enemy. People always ask me what journey I'm on, so I'm going to show you right here what journey this character is on. This isn't my farthest character. The farthest character I have, I think, is going into journey 26 currently, but of the 3 characters I have at 150, I believe they're all on New Game Plus 7 scaling now. One more thing I'm going to show you real quick with the Sacrificial Axe is you can throw Lion's Claw on it, have the exact same setup that I showed you before for Flaming Strike, just add the posture breaking tier here, and then you end up with a really powerful Lion's Claw build. And that's because the AR is so good, it just ends up being a really powerful weapon at only just over 5 weight in general. The fact that you can have such a light weapon and have 800 AR, 700 if you're not using Flaming Strike, but still quite impressive in Flame Art Affinity. Pretty cool weapon that I didn't really use much, so I'm glad I used that one. And thanks for watching this one. I'm going to go in and talk a little bit about the ending here and our DLC expectations as well. So, by the way, comment if there's a build that you want to see, so definitely comment below if there's a weapon I haven't covered yet that you want to see in a build video, because odds are it will be getting covered at some point. But we did not see a DLC trailer at the Game Awards. It seems like DLC is a little bit farther out still. That being said, I'm still going to cover Elden Ring, so be sure to sub, and thanks for watching this build video.